Welcome to Practical Responsive Web Design, and my name is Brett Romero. I'm going to be your instructor for this entire course. And this first section is meant to introduce a few principles and some concepts to get you familiar with what responsive web design is. And these are some concepts that we're going to use throughout the course. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to look at what some flavors of responsive design are. And there are several different kinds that kind of all get mumbled into responsive design or mobile design. But if you want to be really specific about the different areas of responsive design and be able to determine what someone is implying when they're saying mobile design or responsive design, that's what this section is going to introduce. So first off, we have fully responsive web design, in which there are three components that make this up, and we'll get into the details of what that is. Then there's adaptive design that isn't fully responsive but still looks great on different screens, and is kind of the route you may take whenever you're retrofitting an existing website, because to make that existing website fully responsive would be a lot of effort. And this being a practical responsive web design course, we have to consider the amount of effort we want to put into making our site responsive. And the closest we may actually get is making it adaptive, which to most people is going to look responsive. It's still going to look great across different screens and react great on those different screens. And then there's mobile, and this is usually a different site altogether. So you've got one website for your desktop, and then you might have m.mywebsite.com, which might be a completely different website that's fully optimized for mobile. So what that means is it is providing an optimal experience for mobile users. There's the full functionality, maybe it's games, maybe it's different kinds of interactions that you have on your site, and you've brought that experience to the mobile user. We'll talk more about mobile in a little bit. So let's go ahead and look at the first part of the flexible layouts that we're discussing here, which is going to be responsive web design. So Ethan Marcotte is credited with the term responsive web design, and he put together three components that make up a responsive web design. There's a flexible grid-based layout, in which as the screen resizes, the grid resizes, so the website is very fluid and is moving in real time as the browser is being resized. And another part of this is that it must have flexible images, and media, meaning video, must also react as the browser resizes. And then the last part are the media queries, which are a cascading style sheet component, or CSS. And this is where we actually get into writing code that says, if the screen is this size, do this. If it's this size, do this. And we can really target different screen sizes. Next, we discussed earlier, was adaptive design, where you're almost responsive, but you're not quite there. You're almost at a responsive web design, but not quite. And I mentioned this is usually with a retrofit of a site that you want to make look great across different screens. It depends on how far you want to go, but usually, being practical, you don't have the resources and the time to go fully responsive, but you still get close enough that most people will look at it and think it is responsive. So what does this entail? We still keep the second component of a responsive web design, which is we can have flexible images and media. We also certainly make use of media queries so that we can tell our website to look certain ways for certain screens, but we don't have the flexible grid. We don't have this fluid layout that as you're resizing your browser, your website's reacting to all that, and you see things shrinking and expanding. And then there's the mobile website. So I mentioned earlier, this might be a completely separate site that detects a device, not a screen. It detects a device, a smartphone, for example, and it will present itself optimized for that smartphone. So it's got a lot of functionality, interactivity. Some sites may be very simple in that they'll just display, say for example, a restaurant may just display the hours, the address, and a phone number that you can click and call. But this is all you need if you're mobile. You just, where is it at? What's the phone number? How do I call them? How do I get to it? So it's quite a different experience, and it's not targeting different screen sizes, which an adaptive and a responsive design will do. They'll work across all kinds of different screens, whereas the mobile site is going to target particular devices and optimize for them. So let's look at what does it mean to have a fluid grid, and this is the first component we discussed of a responsive web design. The opposite of a fluid grid would be a fixed grid. So it may be 500 pixels fixed, and it's going to stay that size across all kinds of different screens. So if your screen is 300 pixels wide, if you're on a smartphone, for example, you'll end up with horizontal scrolling. And this gray image here is kind of depicting a website with navigation at the top, a footer at the bottom. The main content is this bigger square in the middle, and a sidebar. So as the browser resizes, you can see the grid is static. It's not resizing at all. But when you get into a more fluid grid, you can see here it's resizing. And this grid is 100% width, so it's 100% of the width of the browser, which allows it to resize itself. Now, sometimes you may have padding or margins around your layout that causes horizontal scrolling. So you may implement 100% width, but because you still have some padding or margin in your design, this may cause some horizontal scrolling. You can implement an overflow hidden to remove that, and we'll get into this whenever we start looking at code examples. And then there's the flexible images, which are again a width of 100%, but we're doing a max width of 100%, and a height is auto, meaning adjust the height automatically. The browser will adjust the height automatically. And there are some conditional comments we're going to look at for Internet Explorer. And this is an example. It says, if less than Internet Explorer version 9, do this in the code block. So Internet Explorer is using a width auto instead of a width 100%. For example, IE8 and IE7, we'll look at that and make use of that information so we can have compatibility in those lower browsers. And that's something we're going to look at a little bit when we get into code examples. At media queries, which are the third component of the three that we had for responsive web design. And they look like this in our code. They are a cascading style sheet component. And we can specify different attributes. So print means that you can put code inside of this media query block that will format your website for print, so that when it prints out on a printer, it's got a particular look that is different from what you see on the desktop. But what we're going to be interested in is screen, which is basically the web browser. This is what we want it to look like on the screen. And then we're going to further specify, whenever it's a particular width, run this code. So this says max width. That means anything from 0 to 500 pixels. Execute this code, which is basically a color of white. So we might change text to white. And the way that works is if we look at a 1000 pixel wide screen and we divide it in half, so we get 500 pixels on both sides, and this gray area here is where our code will execute. So if the screen goes from 800 pixels down to 450, this color white will execute in that area between 0 and 500. And then we can keep specifying. We can say if a range between 501 to 800 pixels, which is this range here, it run this code, which is basically the color green. So that may change text to green or something else to green. We would further specify what exactly we want to change to green. And then we can say even 800 on up to whatever width we go. In this case, it would be 800 to 1000. We're going to do another color. So we split our screen into 3 regions, and sometimes you don't need to make it this complex. In fact, a lot of the examples we're going to look at will use only one media query. But this is just showing you can divide your screen up into however many slices you want to optimize for. And this depends on your design. You may have a design that you find out as you resize the browser and you go through different widths. Your design doesn't look good at a certain point, so you put a media query in and you tell your design to look a certain way. Then you keep shrinking the browser, and maybe you see again, okay, well, here's another point that I need to tell my design to do something else so that it looks nice at this other smaller size. So it's really depending on your how your design looks at different screen sizes, and we'll see plenty of examples to sort of demonstrate what is happening at the different sizes and where we may want to implement a media query. Okay, so we're going to kind of look at some of this, an actual example of how these types of media queries get applied. Now we're going to look at the importance of ordering, and here I've got a media query that's saying anything below or at 500 and below, change the text to gray. So let's look at this in action, and there you have it. If I take this rule outside of the media query, put it below the media query, so our text is still red, but once we get 500 or below pixels, you can see it's still red. So that rule is overriding the media query. So this is a good demonstration of the importance of ordering. So what's happening is the browser is processing this. It's just going down like this, whatever it gets to. So it gets to the media query, says, okay, I've got to apply this rule. Then it gets to this one. Okay, I've got to apply this rule. And this one is last, and it's saying red. So it's overriding. And that's why we need to have it further up for that to work correctly. And that's just a quick demonstration of the importance on ordering. Okay, now we're going to talk about VIEWPORT. And this is going to be some metadata that we'll enter into our cascading style sheet, and you'll see an example of that shortly. But basically the viewport is the size, the viewing area that we look at, basically the website. So, and in that case, it's the browser, the viewing area, the content area within the browser. And on a smartphone or, say, a tablet, that's going to be the entire width, because we can't resize the browser on a smartphone, for example. And this is what it looks like. And you'll see examples of this in the projects, and coming up there'll be more examples of this. So we specify this meta tag that's called VIEWPORT, and the content is width equals device width. So we're on the smartphone or tablet, we want to be the full device width because the viewing area is the full device viewing area. We want to scale it at 1. So in this case, it doesn't shrink all of our site down and try to jam it all into the phone and make everything small, and then we've got to pinch and zoom. That's not going to be the case because we're using a responsive design, and we're keeping everything at a 1.0 scale, so it's all completely readable and you don't need a pinch. So we're kind of handling a lot of the fact that we're not trying to cram all of our site onto the phone. We're doing things with our design to make it fit through media queries, basically. So if we were to scale, just to see how this works, to 1.5, we would scale off of the phone's viewing area. So the viewport can scale larger than the phone's viewing area. It's just that you'd only see maybe half of your site. And you can go the other way. You can scale it smaller, in which case you won't see, you'll see all of your site, but then there's going to be a lot of empty space as well. So the 1.0 just takes up that entire viewing area and maximizes the real estate. And of course, this is great for a horizontal view. Number of web resources that help us in building our site, checking compatibility, helps us with debugging and retrofitting an existing site. And one great resource is Can I Use? This is a nice website that you can check the compatibility of different cascading style sheet attributes and see which browsers they work across. So you'll see how this is used in the course and how valuable it can be. Because things change, so you kind of need a resource you can go to and figure out how compatible something is across different browsers, different versions of those browsers. Another nice site is Modern IE, just because, especially with older IE 8 and 7, there's compatibility issues there, and so we looked at earlier the cascading style sheet comments for Internet Explorer. This site lets you enter in your website, and it just kind of runs through it and tells you how compatible you are with Internet Explorer. And then finally, there's Browser Stack Live, which is a really nice resource for looking at your site in real browsers, because basically you log into another computer running those browsers and you can look at it there. So if you want to look at it in Internet Explorer 8, Internet Explorer 7, you can do it in real browsers and not emulators. And I want to say a few things about emulators. I know that there are some you can check your website's compatibility through an emulator. Basically, you go to some website, type in the address, and it looks like a phone or a tablet, and it shows you what your site will look like. I don't trust those because they're not as accurate as using the real thing. And if you look at your phone, if you look at your website on a device, and then you look at it through the emulator, you start seeing the differences, especially if you begin scrolling through, navigating through your site through the emulator. You'll start seeing weird things happening. But the emulators just can't capture the accuracy of looking at it on a real device. So this is kind of an exception. Browser Stack is, because it is real web browsers and they're in virtual machines. So it kind of looks like you're going to an emulator, but you're remotely logging into these machines, so it's not an emulator. They do have emulators for mobile devices, which I would recommend not to use those because they're not the same thing as their full desktop web browsers. And so then there's the question of, do you need to take all this time to make your site responsive? And one way to check this to see how many mobile users are coming to your site is through your analytics, Google Analytics. And you can do that by going to audience on the left side, then mobile, then devices, and it will show you what kind of hits you're getting. But even if you are getting a low number of hits, I would say prepare now, start getting used to responsive web design techniques, how to use them, how to implement them, what they're all about, because you never know when you might get a flood of users. Maybe you did a guest post on a popular site, you got exposure somehow. All of a sudden, these users come over there. They're coming through their smartphones and their tablets, and if your site's not optimized, you'll see high bounce rates because they're just going to hit one page. They're going to see they can't read anything, and they're just going to leave. That's called a bounce. And you're not going to be able to capture this group of people that basically want to interact with you, maybe subscribe to your newsletter, maybe even purchase products. So you want to make that opportunity available to yourself, that you're able to capture these users and be prepared when that time comes. And especially if you are even getting those users now, then certainly you want to optimize for mobile design. If you're wanting to learn responsive web design, I have the perfect course for you. Practical Responsive Web Design. This is a hands-on course, meaning you'll get right involved with the code. Not only do you get to learn some great foundational material to solidify your knowledge, but then you'll dive right into applying it. This is a structured course, formatted for great learning. You'll absorb this material, take that skill, put it in your toolbox, and walk away with something you can begin using immediately. And you can get this course at a great discount. Just click the link in the description of this video to get your discount and start your learning experience now. And I'll see you inside the course.